On a sweltering July day, when the fields around Silverhome were bathed in the golden glow of the sun, Jacob Mackay routinely checked his lands. The silence was only occasionally broken by the chirping of grasshoppers and the rare cry of a bird of prey over the hills. By the pond, where a cool breeze barely stirred the mirror-like surface of the water, stood his horse, Spark. Its dark coat shimmered with sweat, but the animal seemed not to notice the scorching sun. Jacob initially paid no attention to this. He thought Spark was simply seeking coolness in the water. In such heat, that would be natural. However, he was surprised that the horse stood in the pond for so long, motionless, as if lost in some kind of trance. At that moment, Jacob felt a slight unease, but he brushed it off, attributing it to the animal's quirks. A week passed, and Spark's habit continued to repeat itself. Every morning, the horse would head to the pond, standing knee-deep in the water, and remain there, despite the scorching air. Its behavior began to seem not just strange to Jacob, but almost frightening. He started to wonder what could be attracting it to this place. One of the hot evenings, Jacob shared his observations with his neighbor, Lewis Hall. Lewis, an old farmer with a kind smile, listened to him and thoughtfully nodded. "You know," he said, "my horses are also behaving differently. They start getting closer to the water, as if something is calling them there. But I thought it was just the heat affecting them." These words added to Jacob's concern. He decided to talk to other farmers in the area to find out if anyone else had noticed such oddities. At the Reed family farm, he was met with similar stories. The Reed's horses were increasingly straying from their usual routes and heading towards the riverbanks, as if seeking something more than simple coolness in the water. Returning home under a crimson sunset, Jacob found himself looking at his pond differently. It was no longer just a part of the landscape, but something mysterious, hiding answers to questions that tormented him. As the night covered the farm with a thick warmth, Spark continued to wander by the stable gates, casting short glances towards the water. There was something eerily wrong about this behavior. When summer gave way to early autumn, Spark's habits not only persisted, but became even more alarming. The horse's morning walks to the pond had become a ritual that Jacob could no longer ignore. But real concern gripped him when one morning, after the first unexpected frost, he saw Spark breaking the thin layer of ice with its hooves to enter the water again. The air was filled with the sharpness of the first cold, the grass covered with shimmering silver frost, but Spark seemed not to notice these changes. The icy water, cold to the point of pain, did not deter it. This caused Jacob not just concern, but real alarm. He decided he could no longer delay. Jacob called the local veterinary clinic and asked Dr. Sanders to come as soon as possible. Dr. Sanders, known in the area for his precision and strict approach to business, agreed to visit the farm despite his busy schedule. "We will definitely find out what is happening," he assured Jacob. While waiting for the veterinarian's visit, Jacob tried to keep Spark away from the pond. He locked it in the stable, reinforced the locks, and even put a heavy chain. But Spark, who had always been calm and obedient, now became unpredictable. At night, the horse relentlessly kicked the stable, as if trying to free itself. Each sound echoed in Jacob's mind with a hollow alarm. The next morning, the veterinarian finally arrived. Dr. Sanders examined Spark with visible interest, checking its temperature, breathing, and overall condition. The horse looked absolutely healthy, but its behavior remained a mystery. "This guy is physically fine," Dr. Sanders pronounced, furrowing his brows. "But the fact that he is so drawn to the water is definitely not normal. Perhaps the reason lies not in the animal itself, but in the environment. Have you checked the pond water lately?" These words made Jacob pause. He had never thought about the water. For him, the pond was just a part of the landscape, nothing remarkable except for Spark's strange behavior. But now, when the veterinarian mentioned it, the pond began to seem alien and even sinister to Jacob. Dr. Sanders suggested taking water samples for analysis. It could be anything: chemical discharge, mineral anomalies, or even rare microorganisms, he suggested. Better to know for sure than to remain in ignorance. Jacob nodded, feeling the tension in his chest growing. He couldn't shake the thought that the pond had become the epicenter of something bigger than just his horse's strangeness. When the veterinarian left, leaving the water samples in his laboratory, Jacob was left alone by the pond. A light breeze rustled the frozen grass, and the water's surface reflected the gloomy sky. Something was hidden beneath its surface, and Jacob was sure he would soon find out. A week had passed since Dr. Sanders took the water samples for analysis, but it felt much longer to Jacob. The wait was agonizing, and each day spent on the farm only fueled his concern. Spark still gravitated towards the pond, but Jacob no longer tried to restrain it by force. Instead, he allowed the horse to enter the water, carefully watching its every move. This time, his attention was drawn not only to Spark's behavior, but also to the water itself. Its surface shimmered unusually brightly under the morning sun, as if the pond held something more than just a reflection of the sky. Jacob stood on the shore, feeling a strange attraction similar to what Spark seemed to experience. He tried to shake off this feeling, focusing on the upcoming meeting with Dr. Sanders. The doctor arrived early in the morning, as promised. His expression was serious, but Jacob caught a glint of interest, almost childlike curiosity, in his eyes. "I have some results, but I'm not sure they will give us the full answer," Dr. Sanders began, unpacking a folder with documents. According to him, unusual elements were indeed found in the water. The mineral composition of the pond turned out to be unique for this region, containing a high level of rare compounds that could affect the nervous system of animals. "These minerals could be of natural origin," Dr. Sanders continued, "but their concentration is so high that it looks more like an anomaly. Perhaps some underground source is feeding your pond." Jacob listened, not taking his eyes off the pond, which at that moment seemed even more mysterious to him. "And what does this mean for Spark?" he finally asked. "Is it harmful to him?" "At first glance, no," Dr. Sanders replied. "But I can't guarantee that long-term exposure to these minerals is safe. Your horse's behavior seems to be caused not by harm, but rather by a kind of stimulation. Perhaps the water gives it something it subconsciously seeks." These words only intensified Jacob's curiosity. The water, which had seemed ordinary and familiar to him, had now become an object of mystery, the solution to which lay beyond his understanding. He decided it was time to go beyond his farm and see how things were on other plots. Together with Dr. Sanders, they set off on a tour of the neighboring farms. On each plot, they found the same picture: horses, as if subject to one and the same invisible force, stood or wandered near the water. Even those animals that had not previously shown interest in the ponds now spent most of their time there. "This is more than just a coincidence," Dr. Sanders said when they returned to Jacob's farm. "This anomaly encompasses your entire area. I will send requests to other laboratories to understand how widespread this is." When the doctor left, leaving Jacob alone with his thoughts, the farmer felt a new sensation, a mix of fear and determination, burning in his chest. The pond was no longer just a place on the map for him. It had become a riddle that concerned not only him, but his entire community. Jacob knew that something bigger awaited him ahead, something he could not have imagined. Evening in Silverhome descended quickly, painting the hills in crimson-orange hues. Jacob McKay sat on the steps of his porch, glancing at Spark, who was heading towards the pond again. The horse walked calmly but confidently, as if led by an invisible force. This time, Jacob decided to follow it. He cautiously approached the water, trying not to disturb the silence, as if afraid to scare away the very mystery. Spark waded into the pond up to its knees, lowered its head, and froze, as if listening to something inaudible to the human ear. Jacob felt uneasy. This sight evoked both admiration and concern in him. There was something too conscious, almost human, about the horse's behavior. At that moment, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an approaching car. It was Dr. Sanders. The veterinarian got out of the car with a stack of documents in his hands. His face was focused, but his eyes betrayed hidden excitement. "I have news," he began, approaching. The doctor reported that the results from the laboratories showed something unexpected. The minerals in the pond contained rare compounds that could cause animals to feel relaxed and even euphoric. "It's like a natural sedative," he explained. Your horses are literally experiencing pleasure by being in the water. But that wasn't all. The water samples also contained traces of microorganisms unusual for this region. According to Dr. Sanders, these microorganisms could interact with the mineral composition of the water, creating an effect that attracted the animals. This is not harmful, but it's not entirely natural either, he added. Something is bringing these elements into your pond. It could be underground sources or some geological processes. Jacob remained silent, looking at the calm surface of the water. He felt that the answers Dr. Sanders had given him were just the tip of the iceberg. Deep down, he understood that the pond's mystery was connected to something bigger than just rare minerals and microorganisms. What should we do? Jacob finally asked. For now, observe, Dr. Sanders replied. I will send the samples to more specialized laboratories. If this influence spreads or begins to harm the animals, we will have to take measures. But for now, it looks like a rare natural phenomenon, not a threat. After the doctor left, Jacob stayed by the pond until late evening. A light mist spread over the water, adding a mystical atmosphere to the scene. Spark stood motionless, as if dissolved in this mysterious harmony. Jacob knew he had to find answers. This was no longer just about caring for his horse or his farm. It had become his personal mission. He decided that the next morning he would visit even more neighbors to gather additional data. If the pond was indeed part of something bigger, Jacob needed to understand how it could affect his community. However, deep down, he already realized this pond was not just water. This place held secrets that Jacob was only beginning to unravel. The next morning, when the first rays of the sun painted the hills of Silverhome, Jacob McKay set out on his journey. His old truck crossed the winding country roads leading to his neighbors' farms. He knew that the more information he gathered, the closer he would be to solving the pond's mystery. The first stop was the Carlisle family farm. As it turned out, their horses were also drawn to the pond, but now this behavior was accompanied by strange apathy. They seemed to lose interest in everything else, said Amy Carlisle, looking worriedly at her best mare. But strangely in the water, they seemed completely at peace. At the neighboring farm, owned by Henry Hall, the story was similar. His stallion, usually known for his spirited nature, now spent hours by the water, not even reacting to food. It's like someone turned off his energy, Henry complained, shaking his head. Returning home, Jacob felt more and more that the situation was beyond his understanding. He increasingly felt that it was not just about minerals or microorganisms. There was something deeper, an invisible force that affected the animals, something that even science could not explain. When he returned to his farm, Dr. Sanders was already waiting for him with updated research results. The laboratories confirmed that the microorganisms in the water were a rare species found only in remote parts of the oceans. These creatures released substances that, interacting with the pond's minerals, created a strong biochemical effect on the animals' nervous systems. This explains why your horses react so strongly to the water, Dr. Sanders said. But the question is, how did these organisms end up here? It seems that the water source is connected to deep underground layers, possibly ancient seas that have long been hidden beneath the earth. These words evoked a mix of surprise and concern in Jacob. His farm seemed to be part of some ancient natural system, hidden from human view for thousands of years. But if that was the case, how far could the influence of this phenomenon spread? That evening, when Jacob stood by the pond again, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking into the eyes of something much bigger. Spark stood beside him, calmly nibbling on the grass, but the horse's gaze kept returning to the water. Jacob decided it was time to act. If nature had indeed revealed its secret to him, he was obligated to unravel it. We need to understand what is happening, he said to himself, and we will do it. The next day, Jacob began preparing for the next stage of his investigation. Now, knowing that the problem concerned not only his farm, he arranged a meeting with representatives from the local university to attract the attention of specialists to this phenomenon. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of a journey that could lead to the most amazing discoveries of his life. Early morning in Silverhome was filled with unusual excitement. Jacob Mackay stood on the shore of his pond with a group of scientists from the University of Montana. Among them were geologists, biologists, and hydrologists, drawn by Jacob's stories and Dr. Sanders' analysis results. Their interest only grew as they conducted their research. The initial results confirmed the pond was indeed connected to an ancient underground water system, remnants of a sea that disappeared millions of years ago. These waters rose to the surface through cracks in the Earth's crust, bringing with them rare microorganisms and mineral compounds that created the effect described by Dr. Sanders. This is like a natural anachronism, a piece of the distant past preserved in this land, said one of the scientists, her voice sounding both excited and reverent. But the most amazing discovery was the ability of microorganisms to cause not only physiological but also behavioral changes in animals. The scientists suggested that these creatures could stimulate specific areas of the brain responsible for relaxation and stress adaptation. For Jacob, this became a discovery that could change not only his farm, but the lives of the entire community. After several weeks of research, the scientists began developing recommendations for preserving the unique ecosystem. Meetings were organized with farmers in the area, where the significance of the discovery and the importance of careful interaction with the natural phenomenon were explained. Jacob became the main link between the scientists and the local residents, his authority among his neighbors growing significantly. Spark, like the other horses, continued to visit the pond, but now Jacob looked at it with a different perspective. He understood that the horses were not only seeking solace in the water, but also intuitively feeling its beneficial influence. This process was part of a natural harmony that humans were only beginning to understand. A cold autumn evening arrived. Jacob stood alone by the pond, watching the calm surface of the water. The wind ruffled his hair, and he took a deep breath of the fresh air. Spark grazed lazily nearby. At that moment, Jacob felt a deep connection with his land, its history, and what it could offer the world. The pond, which had once caused him concern, had now become a symbol of the unity of nature and man. This place was no longer a mystery, a frightening unknown, but a source of inspiration and realization of how vast and complex the surrounding world was. "We are all just a part of something bigger," he said softly, watching the water shimmer in the light of the setting sun. At that moment, he understood that the path that began with concern for his horse had led him to a realization that changed not only his life, but the lives of many around him.